In this session, we will learn about the major biomolecules essential for the living organisms. When we study about the chemistry of living organisms, we learn that chemical compounds with which all the living organisms are made of, they are categorized as organic compounds. When we learn about the chemical make of a cell, we see that 70% of it contains water and the rest of the cell mostly contains carbon based molecules. That is why it is biochemistry is a branch of organic chemistry. Organic chemistry is the study of carbon compounds. Nature has beautifully selected this atom carbon because carbon can form has 4 electrons in its outer shell and can share its electrons with other 4 atoms to form covalent bonds. It can form single bonds, double bonds and triple bonds. The 4 major organic molecules are giant molecules. When we see about these molecules essential for the survival, they are usually large giant molecules, and when we learn about these giant molecules, we find they are polymers. That is, they are giant because linking of many small monomeric units. So poly means many and mer means units. They are biopolymers. These polymers are built from small monomeric units called as monomers. And we biologists, we call these large molecules as macromolecules. And the macromolecules we have found in organisms, they can be categorized into 4 types. One is the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and so these are the 4 types of large molecules found in the living organisms. Proteins, which are the structural and functional part units of living organism, like enzymes and the structural components. All, if you see, they make most of the structural and functional component of the living organism. Lipids, they are energy storage molecules. Carbohydrates are energy rich molecules, and nucleic acids are macromolecules which store the genetic information. We will learn in detail about these 4 biomolecules. The first biomolecule we will learn about is about the carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are biomolecules which all organisms use it as a source of energy. And some carbohydrates are also acting as a structural molecules. Carbohydrates, from the name we can learn that they are composed of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. If you see this carbohydrate, the monomeric unit of the carbohydrates are simple sugars. It can be a 5 carbon sugar or a 6 carbon 5 carbon sugar or 6 carbon sugar. The number of carbons with which the sugar a molecule is made can differ. So these simple sugars are the basic building blocks of the carbohydrate, and the carbohydrates are used by cells of living organisms to store and produce energy. These monomeric units are linked together by a bond to form the large molecules, that is the large polymeric molecules. How are they linked is by forming a glycosidic bond. The bond formed between 2 monomeric units is known as the glycosidic bond. So how is it formed is water molecule is removed when 2 molecules are linked together. By process of dehydration, the 2 sugar molecules are linked together. Like forming of molecules, that is forming a formation of bond, similarly the bond can also be broken by hydrolysis process. So water is split and the bond is broken. So now we will see that carbohydrates are of different types. So they can be classified into different types based on the number of sugar molecules they are made of. If the carbohydrate is made of a single sugar molecule, then they are categorized as monosaccharide. Here saccharide means sugar. So if this molecule is made of just one sugar molecule, then they are called as monosaccharide. Monosaccharides are simple sugars. For example, you can see here glucose, galactose and fructose. They have the same chemical formula, but they have a different structural. Monosaccharides are basic form of fuel in all living organisms. They are easily soluble, so transported to all cells by body fluids, where they are metabolized and release energy, which is used for various functions inside the cell. Disaccharide, the next type of carbohydrate, is where two units, sugar molecules, are linked together. So di means two sugar molecules linked together is called as a disaccharide. Examples of disaccharide carbohydrate is sucrose, lactose and maltose. Polysaccharides are many sugar molecules linked together. They are complex carbohydrates. So here different polymers, polysaccharides, what you find are starch, glycogen and cellulose. Starch is made of glucose molecules, many glucose monomeric units linked together. They are actually, starch is a food reserve of plant, and glycogen is another polysaccharide. Here also you find the monomeric unit as glucose. Glucose are linked together, but you can see the arrangement pattern is different. This is having a branched pattern compared to that of the starch. Glycogen is a carbohydrate reserve for animals. It is stored in human liver. And cellulose, cellulose is a structural carbohydrate which is rich in plant cell wall, and here also it is made of many monomeric units, and the arrangement pattern you can see it is different. So carbohydrates, they have various functions. They are acting as a fuel molecule. Some carbohydrates are also acting as storage molecules, and as some are also as structural. The next type of macromolecules found in the living organisms are lipids. The general characteristic feature of lipids is they are hydrophobic in nature, that is water fearing. They do not mix with water. They are also organic molecules made with carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, but the ratio of hydrogen and oxygen is much higher than what we find in carbohydrates. Lipids includes fats, waxes, steroids and oils. The major role, function, what they perform in the living organisms are they helps to store energy, insulate the body, they act as a cushion layer and also protect organs. The monomeric units of lipid are fatty acids. So what are fatty acids? They are long chains of carbon, and at one end they have a carboxyl group. So fatty acid has this structure, and the number of carbon atoms in the carbon chain usually ranges from 2 to 24 in numbers. This monomeric unit, that is fatty acids, and the polymer structure will vary depending on the type of lipids. And here not all lipid groups contain fatty acids as their monomeric units. We will see why. This fatty acid, the monomeric unit, it is of two different types majorly. That is, you categorize as saturated fatty acid and unsaturated fatty acid. What is a saturated fatty acid is, when you see in the carbon chain, if there is only single bonds found, then the fatty acids are called as saturated fatty acids. But if a double bond is found in the carbon chain, then the fatty acid is called as an unsaturated fatty acids. In the macromolecule, the monomeric units are linked together by a bond which is called as this ester bond. So where is this ester bonds formed? For example, in a triglyceride, you have a glycerol molecule and fatty acid chains. So here dehydration reaction takes place, forming an ester bond between the carboxyl group and the carboxyl group of the fatty acids, and the hydroxyl group of an alcohol monomer. So resulting in a ester linkage. So what is the bond linkage which you find between the monomeric units are ester linkages. There are different types of lipids, and here we can see the classification of lipids. They are classified as simple lipids, compound lipids and derived lipids. Here in our syllabus we will learn about each of these lipid types with an example. Triglyceride as an example for simple lipids, phospholipid as an example for compound lipids, and steroids as an example for derived lipids. Simple lipids are esters of fatty acid linked with various alcohols. Examples of simple lipids are fats and oil. Fat triglyceride consists of glycerol molecule, which has 3 OH group, and it is linked to 3 fatty acid chains. Waxes are another type of simple lipids. It contains esters of long fatty acid chains with long chains of alcohols. Commonly found waxes, you find it in the sperm whale and in bee waxes and carnauba wax. So these are some of the waxes you find in nature, and major role of these waxes, it acts as a protective coating, as we find it is in leaves, stems, hair and skin, and we also see it as an effective barrier against water loss in structures such as honeycomb. And not only in nature, we are also producing for commercial use, as in furniture polish, automobile coating and floor finishes. Compound lipids, or they are also called as heterolipids, are fatty acid esters with alcohol and in addition some additional groups. One good example is this phospholipids. It contains fatty acids, glycerol and nitrogenous bases, phosphoric acid and other substitutes. So phospholipid is a good example of compound lipids. If you see this phospholipid, like the fats, it also has fatty acid chains attached to glycerol. Here there are 2 fatty acid chains, and the third carbon is linked to a phosphate group. And we can see the cell membranes are all made up of this lipids, that is the phospholipids. The phospholipids have a polar head, and which is hydrophilic in nature. These two fatty acid chains are hydrophobic in nature. This structure helps in formation of all the cell membranes. Derived lipids are derived by hydrolysis from compound and simple lipids. They include alcohols, mono and diglycerides, carotenoids, steroids and terpenes. One good example of derived lipid are steroids. Steroids, unlike fatty acids and phospholipids, they have ringed structures. If you see here, the steroids, they have ringed structures, and if you see the structure, they don't resemble like the phospholipids or fats, but here they are grouped under lipids because they are hydrophobic in nature. One good example of steroid is cholesterol. It is synthesized in liver. Cholesterol is synthesized in liver, and it acts as a precursor for many other hormones like testosterone, estrogen, estradiol, and also for other vitamins like E and K. Apart from the natural steroids, we also have synthetic anabolic steroids, which is used by athletes to build up their muscles quickly. But here using this possesses serious threats when these synthetic steroids are used in larger amounts. To quickly summarize about the lipids, what we learned. So lipids are hydrophobic molecules. They are large macromolecules. You see the monomeric unit is fatty acids, and here the fatty acids can be saturated fatty acid or unsaturated fatty acid. In the classification of lipids, we can see 3 types of lipids. One is the simple lipids, compound lipids and derived lipids. Example for simple lipid is triglyceride. Example of compound lipid is phospholipids, and derived lipids is steroids.